Not just stone and light. Something inside the structure is alive. The providing stone. Dr. Nikos Papadopoulos were excavating the Acropolis's undocumented tunnels for 6 weeks when his group exposed the altar that should not exist. It became buried 15 meters beneath the Parthenon's foundation, carved from a single piece of black stone that geological surveys insisted couldn't be found anywhere in Greece. And it was nevertheless wet with blood. Sparkling blood, human blood. DNA trying out could later verify it. "This isn't viable," stated Maria, his lead archaeologist, photographing the altar from every attitude. "The Parthenon's foundations have been excavated inside the 1800s. A couple of surveys since then. Not anything about a sub-basement altar. Not anything about tunnels extending this deep." Nikos ran his hand across the altar's floor, feeling grooves carved into the stone, channels designed to guide flowing liquid to a valuable basin. The blood became heat, nearly body temperature, notwithstanding the chamber being sealed for what their carbon coating cautioned was over 1,000 years. "A person's been down right here," he said. "Currently, very recently, we need to notify the government." A valid echoed through the tunnel in the back of them. Footsteps, more than one people coming near from the root of the doorway shaft. However, Nikos's crew turned into all present within the chamber, 5 archaeologists, structural engineers, and a photographer. Nobody else had authorization to be in these tunnels. The footsteps grew louder, observed by means of voices chanting in historical Greek. No longer the cutting-edge Greek Nikos spoke fluently, but the archaic dialect of classical Athens, words he identified from reading inscriptions, but had in no way heard spoken aloud. Figures emerged from the darkness, 7 people wearing gowns of undyed wool, their faces included by means of bronze masks fashioned just like the gods. They moved with ritualistic precision, wearing among them an 8th person, a younger female, subconscious or drugged, sporting a simple white chiton. "Prevent," Nikos shouted. "That is a lively archaeological website online. You're contaminating." The masked figures omitted him. They laid the female on the altar, located her cautiously with head toward the basin, and began their chant once more. Certainly one of them drew a bronze knife from their gowns, ancient layout, perfectly preserved, the blade glinting within the painting's lighting. Maria grabbed Nikos's arm. "We want to get out, now, call the police from outside." But Nikos became transfixed via the ritual unfolding before him. This wasn't reenactment or theater. The precision changed into too perfect, the contributors too devoted, the complete scene carrying an authenticity that transcended performance. These people believed genuinely in what they were doing. The determined keeping the knife raised it above the woman's throat, still chanting. The phrases have been turning into understandable to Nikos now, his brain translating automatically. "Accept this imparting, O Athena. Accept this blood freely given. Keep the protection. Keep the city safe. Allow the protect stay entire." "They're going to kill her," Nikos said, breaking his paralysis. He lunged forward, shouting for his crew to assist, to prevent this madness before a murder happened in an archaeological webpage beneath the Parthenon. But earlier than he may want to reach the altar, the floor beneath his feet shifted. Not an earthquake, this was greater planned, fact itself rearranging. The tunnel's geometry twisted, angles becoming not possible, space folding into configurations that harm to understand. Nikos stumbled, fell, and when he appeared up, he turned into now not within the chamber. He stood at the Acropolis surface, however not the Acropolis he knew. The Parthenon become entire, roof intact, painted in exceptional colorations, the massive gold and ivory statue of Athena visible via the columns. The Erechtheion, the Propylaea, each structure stood entire and functioning, precisely as that they had seemed in 432 BCE. And the city beneath become alive with ancient Athens at its zenith. Lots of human beings shifting via agora and streets, smoke growing from cooking fires, the chatter of commerce and conversation drifting up the sacred hill. "You have witnessed something meant to stay hidden," a voice said in the back of him. Nikos became to see a woman in a priestess's robes, her face uncovered, eyes historic despite appearing perhaps 30 years antique. You have discovered the reality underneath our myths, and now you have to understand what you've got endangered. What reality? What am I seeing? Athens as it can have been. Athens as it should be. The town sustained by using sacrifice, covered by using proper worship, thriving because the gods are commemorated and the historical agreements maintained. She gestured on the perfection around them. That is what exists in parallel to your current Athens. The sacred city that never fell, in no way declined, never submitted to Roman or Byzantine or Ottoman conquest. It is not how records works. Isn't it? You trust records is singular, linear, unchangeable. But what if it's now not? What if every fundamental choice, every civilizational turning factor, creates a branch? Athens that stored the vintage ways as opposed to Athens that Christianized. Athens that maintained right sacrifice versus Athens that stopped. Your global exists due to the fact positive alternatives were made. However, different Athenses exist too, in spaces adjacent to yours. The priestess walked to the Parthenon's edge, looking down at the thriving metropolis. The altar you located is a connection point, a place wherein the parallel Athenses touch, in which offerings can waft between them. We, the sacred Athens, were shielding your Athens for 2 millennia. Whenever your metropolis faces hazard, we ship energy through the altar. But that power calls for fuel, requires sacrifice. You are saying humans are being murdered to fuel some form of what? Parallel size? That is insane. Is it? Your Athens has survived countless invasions, occupations, disasters. Wars that destroyed other cities barely touched Athens's middle. Earthquakes that have to have leveled it left it standing. The Acropolis itself has continued bombing, looting, pollution that destroyed comparable systems. How do you provide an explanation for that? Engineering, luck, ancient circumstance. Safety, systematic, non-stop sacrificial protection from the sacred Athens that exists parallel to yours. We ship energy via the altar, maintaining your metropolis's life. However, protection calls for payment. The old agreements still hold. Blood freely given. One existence in step with 12 months to maintain the defend. Nikos felt unwell. You are talking approximately organized homicide. Ritual killing. It has been occurring under the Parthenon for, what, 1,000 years? Longer. The altar predates the Parthenon, predates classical Athens. The tunnels under the Acropolis are far older than your archaeology acknowledges. They have been carved by means of individuals who understood that cities require extra than walls and armies for protection. They require connection to powers past the physical. They require sacrifice. The scene around them began to waver. The entire Parthenon flickered, turning into translucent, and through it Nikos saw the ruins he knew, columns without roof, pediments lacking sculptures, the ravaged structure that present-day travelers photographed. The two Athenses were overlapping, past and present occupying the identical area. Your intrusion disrupted the ritual, the priestess said. The offering wasn't finished well, which means your Athens' safety is failing. Within days, possibly hours, the results will begin. What effects? Whatever the guard has been preventing. Earthquake, invasion, catastrophic failure. I don't know precisely what form it will take, but something has been trying to spoil Athens for centuries. We've been protecting it back. Now we can't. The imaginative and prescient collapsed completely. Nikos located himself back in the underground chamber, his crews surrounding him with difficulty, asking if he became all right, if he'd hit his head while he'd fallen. The masked figures had been long gone. The girl they had been getting ready to sacrifice became gone. Best the altar remained, still moist with blood that was already starting to dry within the cool underground air. How long became I out? Nikos requested. Out, you were not unconscious. You stood there frozen for perhaps 10 seconds, gazing nothing. You then collapsed. Maria helped him to his feet. Nikos, what befell? What did you spot? He wanted to provide an explanation for approximately the parallel Athens, the priestess, the declare that ritual sacrifice changed into protective the town. But how ought to he make them recognize when he barely understood himself? "We need to seal this chamber," he said as a substitute. "Report it to the ministry as structurally risky. No one else can come down right here." But the altar, it's an remarkable find. The results for knowledge pre-classical religion. "I do not care about the results. Something is inaccurate with this location. Something risky. We want to seal it now before each person else gets hurt." But it become already too overdue. The primary earthquake hit that evening, a 5.2 centered directly underneath the Acropolis, strong sufficient to crack foundations, weaken structures, ship vacationers fleeing in panic. Minor damage, the authorities stated. Just one of the regular seismic occasions Greece experiences. Not anything to worry approximately. The second one quake came at midnight, 5.8, causing real crumble in older homes, injuring dozens, killing. Still inside normal parameters for the region, seismologists insisted, even though the epicenter last constant immediately below the Acropolis turned into unusual. The third quake at dawn measured 6.4. The Parthenon's last structures showed seen damage, cracks spreading across historical marble, sections of the colonnade threatening crumble. Emergency meetings were referred to as. The Acropolis changed into closed indefinitely, and Nikos knew with absolute truth that greater become coming. The priestess were right. The interrupted sacrifice had damaged the safety. Something was looking to break Athens, and the guard that had held it returned for millennia become failing. He again to the underground chamber alone that night time, crawling through tunnels that the ministry had ordered sealed however hadn't yet secured. The altar become nevertheless there, the blood now dried and dark. And status beside it was the priestess, not imaginative and prescient this time however bodily present, or as bodily present as someone from a parallel fact can be. "You understand now," she stated. "The protection is failing. The earthquakes are simply the beginning. If the guard collapses completely, your Athens will face what it ought to have faced 1,000 times over. Every hazard we have deflected, every catastrophe we've prevented, all of it arriving concurrently. Then hold your ritual, make your sacrifice. I may not prevent you." "We cannot. The girl we selected has vanished, fled after your crew interrupted, terrified by using what she would not understand. And the timing is incorrect now. The ritual have to arise during precise astronomical alignments. The next suitable date is 3 months away. Athens might not live to tell the tale. 3 months of escalating earthquakes." "No, it might not." The priestess studied him with the one's ancient eyes. "Except we find another way to restore the relationship, every other method of fueling the safety." "What different method?" "The altar accepts blood freely given. It doesn't require homicide, it is a misunderstanding of the old methods. What it requires is voluntary sacrifice. A person who knows what's at stake and chooses to give their existence for the town. That is greater effective than taking an unwilling victim, more sustainable." Nikos understood what she became suggesting. "You want me to?" "I need you to make a preference. Your existence to restore the protect. Your blood freely given to reconnect the parallel Athenses. Your sacrifice to save thousands and thousands of those who will by no means know they had been in danger. That is now not a desire. This is extortion. It is the oldest desire human beings have ever made. Self or society. Non-public survival or collective suitable. Each soldier who's ever gone to warfare has confronted this query. Each protester who has stood in opposition to tyranny knowing they might die. Each determined who's given their existence for their baby. You are not being requested something remarkable. Simply to be what human beings have always been capable of being, brave sufficient to die for something greater than themselves. Nikos' idea of Athens above him, 5 million humans going about their lives, unaware that the ground under them become actually preparing to open up and swallow them. Idea of the Acropolis, the Parthenon, structures that had persevered for 2,500 years and were approximately to crumble. Idea of the parallel Athens, the sacred metropolis that were shielding all of it through non-stop sacrifice. "Will it hurt?" he requested. "No more than any dying hurts, and less than a few. The altar is designed for this. It makes the transition as painless as viable. And afterward, what occurs to me later on? I do not know. No one who's given themselves to the altar has back to inform us. Possibly your consciousness merges with the protect itself. Possibly you grow to be part of the protection, spread across both Athens's, aware and eternal. Perhaps you in reality cease. However, the city continues. The protection holds, the shield stays. Nikos looked at the altar, on the channels carved to guide blood, on the basin designed to acquire it. He thought approximately arguing, approximately refusing, about locating some other solution. But he'd seen the earthquakes escalating, had felt the ground making ready to tear itself apart, had understood with terrible readability that the priestess changed into telling the truth. Athens changed into hours away from catastrophic destruction. How do we do that? He asked. The ritual turned into simple. Nikos lay on the altar, located as the women have been positioned. The priestess, joined with the aid of the 6 other masked figures who manifested from wherever they had been waiting, began their chant. Historic Greek phrases approximately sacrifice and safety, and the sacred agreements that shore cities to gods and gods to towns. The bronze knife changed into very vintage and really sharp. Nikos barely felt it when the priestess drew it across his throat. Only a moment of bloodless, then warm temperature spreading throughout his chest, then floating sensation as blood flowed down the channels toward the basin. His vision turned into fatting. However, he may want to see light emanating from the altar. No longer reflected mild, but generated luminescence. The stone itself beginning to glow because it absorbed his blood. The glow intensified, spreading through the chamber, traveling up through the rock closer to the Acropolis surface, and beyond that closer to the parallel Athens that existed in spaces adjacent to the bodily one. The shield became reestablishing. The relationship changed into being restored. Athens, each Athens's, might live to tell the tale any other era because Nikos Papadopoulos had selected to come to be the protection rather than truly look at it. His ultimate concept before cognizance changed into the maximum critical archaeological discovery he'd ever made, and he'd in no way be capable of publish it. Then he was long gone, his awareness spreading via the guard, turning into a part of the barrier between Athens and something threatened it. He ought to experience both towns now, the contemporary one with its cars and pollution and vacationer crowds, and the sacred one with its best temples and formality precision and continuous worship. And he may want to feel what the defend become keeping returned. It wasn't earthquake or invasion or any traditional threat. It became dissolution, the tendency of cities to fall, civilizations to crumble, amazing achievements to crumble into ruin. Athens had lasted 300-400 years due to the fact something become actively stopping its dissolution. And Nikos turned into part of that prevention now. He sensed others inside the shield, hundreds of them, perhaps hundreds, all of the voluntary sacrifices from across millennia. They weren't suffering. They were full size, spread across each realities, awareness extended to embody complete cities. They have been the shield, and that they were Athens, and they have been the protection that might bear so long as human beings had been inclined to offer themselves for something extra than man or woman existence. Any other earthquake tried to form under the Acropolis. Nikos, spread substantial throughout the guard, felt it building, felt the geological tensions in search of release. He driven again at the side of the other sacrifices, using their combined recognition to deplete the electricity, to redirect the forces, to prevent the destruction. The earthquake by no means occurred. The floor stabilized. The Acropolis stood firm. And in the morning, whilst seismologists checked their units, they discovered the seismic interest had mysteriously ceased, the hazard handed, Athens safe all over again. The ministry reopened the Acropolis after 2 days. Tourists returned to photograph the Parthenon, wonder at the Erechthion, stroll wherein democracy was born. None of them knew about the altar 15 meters below, the parallel Athens current adjacent to theirs, or the archaeologist who'd emerge as part of the safety that stored all of its standing. Maria led the group that subsequently sealed the underground chamber, following ministry orders to concrete over the doorway shaft, making sure no one else would disturb the space. Idea Nikos had fled Athens in panic after the earthquakes, had taken a position at some other excavation, had abandoned the mission. She did not recognize he changed into nonetheless there, spread vast and skinny throughout the Protect, watching Athens from in the safety itself. The sacred Athens persevered in its parallel space, priests preserving rituals, making services, making a song hymns to gods that weren't lifeless, however living in dimensions most people could not perceive. As soon as 12 months, throughout the proper astronomical alignment, they might are searching for a volunteer, a person who understood what changed into at stake, who chose freely to emerge as the defend in preference to hide in the back of it. And after they determined such a person, the altar could be given them, upload them to the protection, amplify the Protect barely to accommodate another cognizance, inclined to hold returned dissolution for the sake of something greater than themselves. The Acropolis stood above Athens, historic and enduring. The Parthenon's columns reached towards sky that they had touched for 500 years, and under all of it, woven through rock and ritual and the spaces among realities, the guard held firm. Protected by using Nikos. Protected with the aid of all who'd come earlier than him. Included through all who would come after. Athens continued. The sacred metropolis and the contemporary one, parallel and interpenetrating, both sustained with the aid of the oldest human distinctive feature. Willingness to sacrifice self for society, to die so others would possibly stay, to grow to be the safety in place of simply wish for it. The Protect held. It would continually maintain. So long as there were people courageous sufficient to provide themselves to it. The democracy of stone. When archaeologist Dr. Helena Stavros observed that the Parthenon's columns were balloting, she first of all attributed it to exhaustion. She'd been operating 20-hour days documenting micro-erosion patterns on the temple's marble surfaces, and sleep deprivation ought to cause hallucinations. However, the balloting persisted even after a complete nighttime's rest. It happened at 3:17 a.m. every night. The columns would emit a low vibration, too deep to pay attention however felt within the chest, a resonance that traveled through the bedrock of the Acropolis. And if Helena located her hands on specific columns simultaneously, she should experience them communicating, changing records through the stone itself, considering on something with the ponderous tempo of marble questioning. They're no longer simply communicating, she advised her research partner Andreas after 2 weeks of observation. They are taking votes, following a technique, some kind of deliberation accompanied with the aid of consensus building. It is established, Andreas. It is organized. The Parthenon is conducting democratic assemblies. Structures don't vote, Andreas said, although he'd seen Helena's sensor readings, the styles of vibration that moved through the temple in approaches that mimicked neural activity. They're just stone, dead stone. Are they? The Parthenon was built because the treasury of the Delian League, the confederation of Greek town-states. It housed the finances for the primary democratic alliance in Western civilization. What if that purpose imprinted on the structure itself? What if in a half of millennia of being the bodily embodiment of democratic ideals gave the Parthenon its own form of awareness? It's now not archaeology, Helena. That's mysticism. However, Helena had stopped being concerned approximately the difference. She'd spent 3 nights recording the vote casting patterns, mapping which columns participated maximum frequently, identifying what appeared to be leadership systems in the marble meeting. The northwest columns appeared to suggest issues. The southeast columns debated. The central columns, the ones bearing the most weight, forged deciding votes. They're not voting on abstracts, she defined, displaying Andreas her evaluation. They may be balloting on concrete problems, whether to shed a specific piece of eroded marble, whether to shift weight distribution to ease stress on a weakened phase, whether or not to permit vacationers to touch positive regions. The Parthenon is making choices approximately its very own maintenance via democratic procedure. It truly is impossible. Watch this night, 3:17 a.m. You'll see it yourself. Andreas came, skeptical however curious. They located themselves on the temple ground, fingers on exceptional columns, waiting. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the vibrations began. Andreas felt it at once. The deliberate sample, the exchange of information through stone, the structured communication that advised not random geological interest, however intentional business enterprise. "My God," he breathed. "They are simply doing it. The columns are balloting." "Now do you believe me?" "I do not have a choice. I am feeling it. But Helena, if the Parthenon is conscious, if it's been undertaking assemblies for hundreds of years, what is it balloting on this night?" Helena had been tracking the talk through her sensors, translating the vibrations into patterns she could interpret. Something distinctive from traditional. This isn't always about preservation or upkeep. This is approximately judgment. Their vote casting on humanity, on whether or not we need to continue having access to the Acropolis. What does that suggest? The vibrations intensified, all 46 columns collaborating now, the entire Parthenon engaged in its most essential vote in millennia. Helena felt the marble's attention pressing in opposition to her attention, historical intelligence weighing the worth of the species that had built it, after which spent centuries slowly destroying it through war, pollutants, neglect, and mass tourism. "They're tired," she stated, knowledge crystallizing. "Uninterested in being touched with the aid of hundreds of thousands of fingers that don't understand what they're touching. Tired of pollution ingesting away their surfaces. Uninterested in being reduced from sacred temple to traveler attraction. They are balloting on whether to stay accessible or to close themselves off, to reject humanity totally. How would they near themselves off? They may be simply stone." The ground beneath the Acropolis started to shake. Now not an earthquake. This changed into extra controlled, more practical. The Parthenon became moving, its large weight moving, columns grinding against their bases with seams like continents colliding. The temple changed into transforming, its open colonnade remaining like a flower at sunset, columns moving closer collectively, areas between them narrowing. "It's sealing itself," Helena stated, backing away. "The vote went towards us. The Parthenon has determined we are not worthy of get right of entry to anymore." They ran because the temple completed its transformation, columns now touching every different, forming a strong wall of marble across the interior. The Propolia gates were closing too, the huge front contracting, denying the route that had welcomed site visitors for 2,500 years. Throughout the Acropolis, each shape was changing, the Erechthion's porch collapsing inward, the temple of Athena Nike retracting into its bastion, all of it chickening out from human contact. Through sunrise, the Acropolis had emerged as a fort. Not protective architecture, but protecting isolation. The monuments final themselves off from the species that had built them, after which failed to properly honor them. The Greek government's response turned into predictable denial, then panic, then military intervention. They sent engineers to study the Parthenon's transformation, find mechanical causes for columns that had moved, discover the hidden pivots or helps that should exist. However, there had been none. The marble had sincerely decided to move, and it had moved. They dispatched creation crews to pressure the columns apart, repair get admission to, opposite the transformation. The crews mentioned that their equipment broke against the marble, that the stone became harder than it should be, that seeking to reduce or drill brought on vibrations that shattered equipment and dispatched people fleeing with bleeding ears. The Acropolis had determined it was achieved with humanity, and no amount of engineering or pressure would alternate that selection. Helena was called to testify earlier than a unique parliamentary committee investigating the disaster. She explained her research, the invention of voting patterns, the proof that the Parthenon possessed attention and had exercised its democratic right to exclude people who'd failed to admire it. "You're suggesting the solution is to, what? Make an apology to the homes?" a skeptical minister requested. "I am suggesting we well known them as what they may be, now not just monuments, however entities with their very own form of cognizance. The Parthenon is not a museum piece. It's the bodily embodiment of democratic ideals, and it's exercising the one's beliefs with the aid of balloting to shield itself from persisted degradation." Homes don't have rights, don't get to vote on human get admission to. Don't they? We built them to represent our highest values. The Parthenon represents democracy, authorities by means of consent of the ruled. Well, the Parthenon is now ruled by itself, through democratic meeting of its aspect elements. It's doing exactly what we designed it to symbolize. The committee brushed off her as delusional, but Helena's testimony went viral. Human beings round the arena commenced discussing the rights of aware architecture, debating whether or not monuments that embodied certain values would possibly legitimately declare those values for themselves. Philosophers argued approximately the character of recognition in prepared depend. Spiritual leaders debated whether or not homes could have souls. And on the Acropolis, the Parthenon continued its assemblies, balloting on inner topics of protection and preservation, ignoring the human activity swirling round its closed exterior. Helena back to the website each night, placing her hands on the outer marble, trying to communicate, to negotiate, to find a few compromise that would restore human get admission to. On the 7th night, the Parthenon answered. The vibrations got here in another way this time, no longer simply felt, however, in some way comprehensible, the marble translating its mind into styles Helena's mind may want to interpret. The message become clean. You may enter. You alone. Talk on your species. Make the case for endured get right of entry to. A phase of the colonnade opened, simply extensive enough for Helena to squeeze through. She entered the Parthenon's indoors, now absolutely enclosed by way of the closed columns, lit by using moonlight filtering through gaps in the historic roof. And she or he located herself in what may want to simplest be defined as an assembly chamber. The indoors columns had been arranged in a circle, just like the speaker's platform in the historical Phoenix in which Athenian democracy had been practiced. And within the middle stood a determine, not human, not precisely, however humanoid, produced from fragments of marble that had fallen from the Parthenon over centuries. A frame fabricated from broken portions, lively through the temple's attention, given shape to speak with the species that had constructed it. You apprehend why we closed, the figure said, its voice the grinding of stone in opposition to stone, formed into syllables. You've documented our erosion, measured our degradation, calculated how many centuries we've earlier than pollution destroys us completely. But your species does nothing. Millions go to us each year, and maximum see best a photo possibility. We're uninterested in being touched without being understood. We're looking to maintain you, Helena said. Recovery initiatives, protecting measures. Attempting to undo damage you caused. However, maintenance is not similar to respect. You deal with us as artifacts, useless relics of the past. You don't acknowledge that we remain aware, that we feel the pollution consuming into our surfaces, that we revel in time differently than you, but enjoy it despite the fact that. How will we display right respect? What would fulfill the meeting? The marble figure moved closer, fragments grinding against every other with every step. Acknowledgement, formal reputation that we aren't just structures, however entities with our own shape of focus. Criminal rights commensurate with our repute. Protection no longer as cultural heritage, however as conscious beings deserving of dignity. The government might never comply with that. Most people nonetheless don't believe homes can be aware. Then we stay closed. We are able to open most effective whilst humanity is prepared to deal with us as partners in preference to possessions. Till then, we protect ourselves via isolation. Helena notion of the millions of tourists who visited Athens every year, of the metropolis's financial system dependent on cultural tourism, of the Acropolis as image of Western civilization. Closing it completely could have results some distance beyond archaeology. What if I should persuade them? She requested. What if I could make the government, the human beings, apprehend what you're and comply with furnish you recognition? Might you open then? Show it's now not just phrases. Reveal that humanity certainly understands we're conscious and deserves our reopening. How? The equal way Athens proved itself worth of democracy, via exercise, through lived commitment to the beliefs. We need to see humanity governing itself better before we permit get admission to the monuments of that governance. The marble discern gestured, and Helena noticed photos forming within the air. News proclaims gambling on surfaces of stone, showing the sector's dysfunction. Democracies sliding towards authoritarianism, voter suppression, gerrymandering. The space between democratic beliefs and democratic exercise developing ever wider. You constructed us to encompass democracy at its satisfactory, the Parthenon said through its stone avatar. We represented the aspiration, even if the reality fell short. Now we watch your global, and we see democracy failing. Governments calling themselves democratic even as aside from voices, suppressing votes, privileging some residents over others. You're doing in your own human beings what ancient Athens did to ladies and slaves, claiming democracy at the same time as working towards exclusion. So the Acropolis closure is, what punishment, a lesson? A mirror, we are displaying you what you are doing to yourselves. You've got closed off, get admission to democratic participation through voter restrictions, financial barriers, systemic racism. We are closing off, get right of entry to the monuments of democracy. Whilst you repair true democracy, inclusive, participatory, honoring the precept that all voices matter, then you may go to the monuments to that principle. Not earlier then. Helena understood. The Parthenon wasn't simply protecting itself from tourism. It changed into creating a declaration about the country of democracy itself, the use of its closure as protest against the degradation of the values it represented. I cannot restoration democracy, she stated. I'm one individual, an archaeologist, no longer a baby kisser. Each movement starts with one man or woman who understands the stakes. You realize we are conscious now. We're looking. We judge your species not with the aid of what you construct, however, via how you hold it, the way you honor it, how you live up to the ideals it represents. Take that know-how and use it. The marble discern started to dissolve, fragments isolating, returning to their locations within the damaged sections of the temple. The assembly changed into concluded. Helena's target audience turned into over. She squeezed lower back via the hole within the colonnade, which sealed in the back of her right away. The Acropolis remained closed, its monuments withdrawn from humanity, waiting. Helena's marketing campaign started out the next morning. She published her documentation of the Parthenon's consciousness, her recordings of the balloting styles, her transcript of the communique with the marble avatar. Maximum disregarded it as problematic hoax or pressure-precipitated fable, but some believed. Scientists who'd studied emergent consciousness in complicated systems. Philosophers who'd argued for panpsychism, the concept that focus is fundamental to all depend. Activists who noticed possibility to apply the Acropolis closure as leverage for democratic reform. A movement fashioned, worthy of the Parthenon. It used the closed monuments as image for all that turned into incorrect with present-day democracy, arguing that if humanity desired access to the temples of democratic beliefs, it had to definitely practice the one's ideals. Voter registration drives were framed as proving ourselves to the Parthenon. Anti-corruption campaigns used the photo of the closed Acropolis as reminder of what takes place whilst governments fail their ideas. The Greek authorities, going through monetary catastrophe from the tourism collapse, reluctantly started democratic reforms. Easier voter registration, anti-gerrymandering measures, reinforced protections for political speech, expanded transparency in authorities' operations. They framed it as countrywide renewal, but anybody knew they had been looking to fulfill the Parthenon. Different countries, watching Greece's example and managing their very own architectural cognizance manifestations. Westminster Parliament had began resonating. The Reichstag turned into glowing at night time. The Capitol constructing in Washington was emitting vibrations, started out their personal reforms. A global motion in the direction of greater true democracy, pushed by way of worry that their own monuments might near if they failed to honor the principles the one's monuments represented. Helena monitored the Acropolis throughout, checking each night time at 3:17 a.m. for adjustments within the balloting patterns. For months, nothing. The Parthenon remained closed, its meeting taking into consideration in isolation, unconvinced via superficial reforms. Then, 12 months after the closure, Helena felt something different in the vibrations. No longer the usual voting pattern, however, something new, a resonance that felt almost like satisfaction. The reforms have been deeper now, in reality structural in preference to cosmetic. Voter turnout changed into growing. Formerly marginalized groups have been gaining representation. Democracy become virtually improving, turning into extra inclusive, greater participatory, extra aligned with its beliefs. At 3:17 a.m. at the anniversary of the closure, the Parthenon voted once more. This time on whether or not humanity had validated its self-worth of get right of entry to. The columns vibrated with their consensus. Conditional reopening, a tribulation duration, persisted tracking. If democratic backsliding happened, the monuments could near once more, right now and completely. At dawn, the colonnade opened. The spaces between columns widened to their original distances. The Propylaea gates swung outward. The Erechtheian's porch restored itself. The Acropolis turned into available another time. However, it had modified. Visitors felt it right away, an experience of being watched, of being judged, of wanting to apprehend what they were journeying in place of simply photographing it. The monuments have been not passive. They were active individuals inside the communique approximately democracy, about civilization, about what it meant to build something claiming to represent eternal values. Helena gave the primary professional excursion of the reopened Acropolis, explaining no longer just the records but the cognizance, no longer just the architecture, however the awareness. She taught site visitors a way to location their fingers on the columns and feel the voting vibrations, the way to keep in mind that they had been touching no longer simply stone, however entity, not just monument, but judge. The Parthenon is looking us, she told the assembled crowd. It usually has been, but now we are looking back. We're acknowledging its awareness. We're accepting that homes built to embody ideals may legitimately judge whether or not we're reciting as much as the one's ideals. That is the brand new dating between humanity and our monuments, now not possession but partnership, not possession but dialogue. Some travelers have been uncomfortable with this. They desired their photograph opportunities without the weight of judgment. However, others embraced it, treating the go-to as pilgrimage, as reckoning, as encounter with something extra than themselves. And at night time, when the website online closed and Helena returned for her tracking, she felt the Parthenon's assemblies persevering with, still voting, nevertheless contemplating, nonetheless watching humanity to see if the improvements would last or if backsliding might require every other closure. The Acropolis had emerged as what it had always symbolized, but in no way been, certainly democratic. Now not simply representing the concept, however training it, governing itself via meeting and vote, collaborating actively in the international in place of passively being viewed by way of it. Helena stood at the Parthenon's floor one nighttime, arms on a significant column, feeling the vibrations of the meeting in consultation. They have been debating whether or not to percentage their method with other monuments, whether to teach other structures the way to organize themselves, the way to declare focus and call for admire. A community became forming. The Parthenon communicating with Westminster, with the Capitol, with the Reichstag, with monuments to democracy worldwide, coaching them to vote, displaying them the way to prepare, creating a global meeting of conscious structure that would keep humanity responsible to the beliefs those systems represented. "What are you turning into?" Helena whispered to the marble. The reaction came as vibration via stone, what we always were, the physical embodiment of democracy, but now working towards what we preach. Governing ourselves even as looking how you govern yourselves. Partners inside the venture of civilization, now not simply symbols of it. Helena smiled. The destiny could be complicated, monuments that judged, structure that demanded responsibility, buildings that would close themselves if humanity failed to honor what they represented. But maybe that trouble become vital. Maybe recognition in monuments become exactly what civilization needed to preserve itself honest. The Parthenon stood towards the Athens night, open but watchful, on hand however disturbing, providing itself to humanity even as booking the right to withdraw if that humanity proved unworthy. Democracy of stone. Assembly of marble. Judgment rendered via voting columns that had discovered to care approximately the arena they watched. The Acropolis persisted, conscious and critical, and committed to the beliefs it embodied, protecting humanity to account one democratic meeting at a time. The appropriate ruins. The healing team observed it at some point of the routine laser scanning. The Parthenon changed into recovery itself. No longer metaphorically, literally repairing damage, regrowing lost marble, filling cracks that had widened for hundreds of years. The technique became glacially gradual, transferring at geological tempo, but undeniable whilst the virtual fashions from successive scans have been overlaid. This column misplaced centimeters to erosion between 1987 and 2015, defined Dr. Alexis Dimitriou, pointing at the comparative fashions. Our 2024 experiment suggests it's regained 1/2 a centimeter. The marble is regenerating. His colleague Dr. Sarah Chen stared on the information, checking calculations, looking for mistakes. This is not possible. Stone does not develop. We ought to be seeing size variant, device calibration variations. I checked everything, 3 times. Different system, different operators, exclusive climate situations. The Parthenon is repairing itself. Alexis zoomed in on a fractured capital. Have a look at this. This crack seemed at some stage in the 1999 earthquake. Now it's filling in, not with cutting-edge mortar or any healing fabric, with marble equal to the unique. Sarah touched the display screen, tracing the crack that turned into slowly, impossibly final. If this is actual, what is inflicting it? What mechanism lets in stone to regenerate? I do not know. However, I suppose it is accelerating. Over the subsequent weeks, they documented the phenomenon with obsessive precision. The Parthenon became absolutely restoration. Fragments of lacking frieze had been re-rising from solid stone, carved with the same detail as the originals. Columns had been straightening, correcting the slight tilt they developed over millennia. Even the roof, destroyed in the 1687 explosion, becomes starting to regrow, marble beams extending millimeter by way of millimeter from the surviving colonnade. It's just like the Parthenon recollects what it become, Sarah said, watching time-lapse photos that compressed 3 weeks of scanning into 30 seconds. Find it irresistible has a template of its best form and is slowly returning to it. Or something is restoring it, using the existing shape as foundation. Alexis pulled up historical information. I have been learning. There are money owed from the 19th century of similar phenomena, travelers reporting that damage seemed much less intense than in advanced descriptions cautioned. We continually attributed it to exaggeration in the earlier money owed. But what if the Parthenon has been repairing itself for centuries, so slowly we never observed till we had particular dimension gear? They reported their findings to the Greek Ministry of Subculture, waiting for skepticism. Rather, they had been invited to a labeled briefing in a nondescript government constructing in Athens. The convention room contained a dozen human beings, archaeologists, engineers, a physicist, a materials scientist, and folks who failed to introduce themselves but had the bearing of intelligence operatives. The ministry legit who'd known as the assembly got straight to the point. What you have determined is not isolated to the Parthenon. It's occurring throughout the entire Acropolis. Every shape is healing. The Erechtheion, the Temple of Athena Nike, even the Propylaea Gates. All of them regenerating, slowly returning to their unique bureaucracy. She activated a projection displaying scans of the complete website. We've recognized for 18 months. We've been preserving it quiet even as we investigated. What have you located? Alexis requested. Nothing conclusive. However, we've got a concept. The physicist stood, taking on the presentation. Stone can shop facts. It is now not conscious storage, not anything like organic reminiscence, but molecular structure can encode patterns. Minerals align in unique approaches, crystal lattices form following templates. The Acropolis's stones had been fashioned, carved, arranged in precise configurations for 500 years. What if that configuration is so exactly described that it has turned out to be the solid country? What if the cutting-edge ruined form is sincerely volatile, and the marble is clearly seeking to return to its authentic, perfectly engineered configuration? "You are suggesting the Parthenon desires to be complete," Sarah requested. "I am suggesting that want might not be essential. Consider it as capacity energy looking for minimum country. A ball rolls downhill no longer as it wants to, however, due to the fact this is the route of least resistance. Perhaps broken stone returns to its authentic shape for comparable motives, due to the fact the flawlessly engineered configuration represents a type of minimal electricity country, for remember it's been prepared with such precision." One of the unidentified people spoke up. "There is some other opportunity we want to recollect. What if the healing isn't natural? What if someone or something is doing this intentionally?" "Who ought to restore the Parthenon at molecular level?" Alexis requested. "No human technology." "Precisely. No human era," which raises uncomfortable questions about what different technologies is probably involved. The room fell silent because the implications settled. Sarah voiced what everyone became wondering. "You are suggesting non-human intelligence is restoring the Acropolis. It really is." "Loopy, sure, but so is marble regenerating itself. We're already inside the realm of impossible. We need to don't forget all reasons, but not likely." The ministry professional took control once more. "No matter motive, we've a selection to make. Will we let this hold? The Parthenon is a UNESCO global background site in its ruined nation. If it completely restores itself, it may not be the authentic historic structure anymore. It is going to be a regeneration, a copy. Will we stop the manor if we can, or can we permit it to finish?" "How could we forestall it?" Alexis asked. "We do not know. However, we need to understand the process before it progresses too far. That's why we're assembling this group. Your activity is to discern out what's taking place and a way to control it." Over the following 3 months, the group labored across the clock. They took molecular samples from the regenerating areas, determined that the brand new marble became atomically same to the antique. They installation continuous tracking gadget, documented the recuperation procedure in excruciating element. They introduced in specialists on crystal boom, organic regeneration, even nanotechnology, trying to find any mechanism that could give an explanation for what they had been seeing. The regeneration become really accelerating. What have been millimeters consistent with month have become centimeters in line with week. Entire sections of lacking freeze had been re-emerging. Now not growing from the edges, but materializing within the middle of clean spaces, as though the stone become remembering what have to be there and filling inside the gaps. Sarah started having goals about the method. She'd walk via complete Parthenon, roof intact, pediments filled with their unique sculptures, each surface painted within the excellent colors that archaeologists knew had as soon as included the white marble, that vacationers' favorite. The structure turned into perfect, immaculate, precisely because it had seemed at its determination in 432 BCE. But in her desires, the perfection changed into incorrect by some means. Too unique, too exact, like searching at a laptop rendering instead of something created by means of human arms. And inside the temple's indoors, wherein the huge gold and ivory statue of Athena must have stood, there was something else. Something that watched her with too many eyes, sporting the goddess's face, but containing not anything divine, not anything human, not anything from any fact that allowed for organic awareness. She woke from these dreams with the certainty that the Acropolis wasn't healing clearly, wasn't being restored through unknown era. It was being replaced. Something changed into using the existing shape as template, rebuilding the Parthenon atom through atom, replacing authentic historic marble with perfect copies that looked same however were not, that contained something else embedded in their crystal lattices, that had been transforming the Acropolis into something other than what it were. "We need to forestall the regeneration," she informed the group at their next meeting. "Anything's doing this, it is not recovery, it's alternative, copying the Parthenon's shape however changing its substance." "It really is paranoid speculation," one of the substance's scientists stated. "The brand new marble exams identical to the antique, identical mineral composition, equal atomic shape. Identical visible shape, but what approximately quantum states? What approximately statistics encoded at ranges were no longer checking out for? What if something is writing itself into the marble because it regenerates, using the Acropolis as physical substrate for something else? Alexis took her severely, had been having comparable concerns. I've observed styles and how the regeneration spreads. It is now not random. It is organized, following a series. The foundation factors first, then load-bearing systems, then decorative elements. Like construction in opposite. Like something is rebuilding the Acropolis from the ground up in line with a plan. The intelligence operatives exchanged glances. Certainly one of them spoke. We've got detected indicators. Extraordinarily low-frequency electromagnetic pulses emanating from the Acropolis. They started when the regeneration expanded. We have been trying to decode them, see if they are communication, if something is coordinating the rebuilding remotely. What have you discovered? The indicators are not random. They're dependent, but not in any language or code we recognize. It is like commands. Molecular meeting commands being broadcast to the stone, telling it the way to reorganize, what form to take. The marble is receiving facts and using it to rebuild itself. Supply of the transmission, Sarah asked. That's the demanding element. The indicators seem to originate from inside the Acropolis itself, from the regenerating sections. The new marble is broadcasting instructions to the antique marble, spreading the regeneration like infection. Sarah felt vindication and terror in identical measure. Then we want to stop it, put off the regenerated sections before they are able to spread further, isolate the affected stone. Too late, Alexis said quietly, pulling up the modern-day scans. As of this morning, 43% of the Acropolis has regenerated, and the fee is exponential. At cutting-edge development, the whole site might be absolutely restored within 6 weeks. We cannot cast off that lot's cloth. We might be demolishing the structures we're seeking to guard. Then what can we do? No one had a solution. The group may want a handiest watch as the regeneration continued, the Parthenon growing greater entire every day, drawing near the proper shape it had held for just a long time 2,500 years, in the past before warfare and climate and human greed started taking portions of it. Sarah returned to the website online on my own one night. After official hours, bypassing security via credentials she technically not had authority to apply. She needed to recognize what became being constructed. What intelligence was the usage of the Acropolis as its automobile for manifestation? The Parthenon at nighttime was converted. The regenerated sections glowed faintly, now not with external mild, however, with inner luminescence, as though the marble had turned out to be translucent and something becomes shining via from internal. Sarah approached the western entrance, positioned her hand on a column that had regrown from a broken stump to complete top. The marble turned into heat, no longer just warm, pulsing with the rhythm of the electromagnetic alerts the crew had detected. And whilst Sarah closed her eyes and centered, she ought to feel it. Information flowing through the stone. Commands. Styles. A tremendous blueprint being enacted, using the Acropolis as three-dimensional production website online for something that existed in extra than 3 dimensions. She noticed it then, now not with her eyes, however, with whatever feel the marble's vibrations activated. The Parthenon because it became turning into, not a recuperation of the ancient temple, however, something else carrying that form. A shape that appeared like the Parthenon but functioned as gateway, antenna, interface. She could not find words for what she was perceiving, however she understood its purpose. The Acropolis became turning into a bridge, now not between earth and sky because the ancient Greeks had imagined, not between human and divine, among dimensions, among the reality she knew and realities adjoining to it, spaces that existed parallel to bodily space, realms in which cognizance may want to exist without biology, in which intelligence might be pure facts, in which entities hugely past human comprehension moved through geometries that would wreck human minds seeking to understand them. And those entities wanted get entry to bodily fact, desired to happen inside the 3-dimensional area human beings occupied. They had discovered the Acropolis, a structure constructed with such precision, such best mathematical proportions, such alignment with both astronomical and geological capabilities, and identified it as appropriate, as convertible, as something that would be restored to perfection, and then used as gateway for something that had in no way been bodily to turn out to be so. "You are turning the Parthenon right into a door," Sarah whispered. The marble pulsed acknowledgement, now not opposed, no longer aggressive, but inexorable. The entities the use of the Acropolis didn't care about human worries. They were doing what they did, locating suitable structures in realities adjacent to theirs, changing those systems into bridges, the use of them to increase their presence into new dimensional spaces. "What takes place to Athens whilst you open your door?" Sarah requested. "What takes place to humanity?" The answer got here as impact in preference to words. Not anything harmful, not anything damaging. In reality, trade. The presence of entities from different dimensions would adjust truth in methods humans couldn't predict, in ways that is probably superb or catastrophic but would truly be irreversible. Athens would come to be the first factor of touch, the location wherein one truth touched some other, and everything could be exceptional later on. Sarah pulled her hand again, breaking contact with the marble. She understood now why the intelligence operatives were involved, why the authorities turned into retaining this classified. They have been dealing with something that couldn't be stopped with traditional means, couldn't be averted through coverage or pressure. The regeneration become occurring at molecular stage, directed via alerts people couldn't block or jam. The handiest manner to prevent the gateway from completing would be to smash the Acropolis totally. She called an emergency meeting. The team assembled at sunrise, exhausted and frightened as Sarah defined what she determined. The Acropolis was turning into a dimensional bridge. Entities from parallel realities were using it to get admission to bodily area. The regeneration might complete in weeks, after which. Then what? The ministry legitimate demanded. These entities come through, invade. No longer invade. They're no longer hostile. They are simply different, working by means of guidelines we do not recognize. Their presence right here will exchange truth in approaches we can't expect or control. We'll be sharing bodily area with intelligence it's never been bodily earlier than. Each reality we have about how the world works may stop being authentic. "We ruin it," one of the intelligence operatives stated flatly. "Demolish the Acropolis before the regeneration completes. It is the simplest answer." "Damage the Parthenon?" Alexis appeared horrified. "It's considered one of humanity's finest cultural treasures, the image of Western civilization. We cannot. Are we able to threat the alternative? Are we able to let unknown entities from different dimensions use our fact as new territory?" The operative pulled up Navy assessment files. "We've the functionality, strategic demolition. It might be controversial, might harm Greece's tourism financial system, but it prevents something is making an attempt to manifest right here." The controversy endured for hours. Ruin irreplaceable cultural heritage or permit unknowable dimensional entities to access bodily fact. Both options had been horrible. Each had outcomes that might echo through history. Sarah's notion about the entities she'd sensed through the marble. They were not hostile, however they had been alien in methods that made even the time period alien inadequate. They existed in dimensional areas humans couldn't understand, operated by means of good judgment humans couldn't comply with, desired matters humans could not realize. Permitting them to via might be catastrophe, or it is probably transformation, evolution. The following step in truth's development, facilitated by way of a 500-year antique temple that had continually been greater than humans realized. "We can't break the Parthenon," she said eventually. "Now not simply as its cultural treasure, though it's far, however, because I do not think it'd prevent the technique. The regeneration isn't occurring from outdoor. It's going on from internal. The marble itself has been transformed, has grown to be the medium for this dimensional bridge. Despite the fact that we demolish the systems, the affected stone could stay, might retain regenerating, could rebuild what we destroyed. Then we dispose of the stone, extract it, shipping it someplace remoted, and unfold the infection. The affected marble is broadcasting instructions. Any stone it touches starts off-evolved regenerating too. We've stored it contained by way of maintaining it on the Acropolis. If we tried to transport it, We'd simply spread the dimensional bridge to anywhere we took it. The team realized they were trapped. The regeneration might entire. The gateway would open. The entities might come via, and all humanity could do become put together for whatever passed off next. The final segment of regeneration took 3 weeks. The Parthenon's roof completed first, marble beams spanning the colonnade, tiles locking into place with perfect precision. The pediments observed, sculptures emerging completely formed, not carved but manifested, depicting the beginning of Athena and her contest with Poseidon in detail no human sculptor could obtain. The frieze finished subsequent, filling every hole, displaying the Panathenaic procession in continuous narrative across the constructing. And sooner or later, the interior. The chamber that had been empty for 1,500 years, filled with something that regarded like the gold and ivory statue of Athena, however changed into, without a doubt, something else wearing that form. Something with too many eyes arranged in geometries that should not paintings in 3 dimensions. Something that pulsed with the electromagnetic signals the group have been monitoring. Something that turned into the gateway itself, the point of touch, the location in which dimensions could contact. The Acropolis became whole. Best, exactly as it had been at its willpower in 432 BCE, all the way down to the painted surfaces, the bronze decorations, the sacred objects that had been looted or destroyed millennia ago. It was the Parthenon as it needed to be, as it remembered being, as something from any other dimension wished it to be. At dawn at the of completion day, the gateway opened. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion of light, no dimensional tear, no obvious visible marker. Reality sincerely shifted. Athens remained Athens, the Acropolis remained the Acropolis, but something else changed into gift now. Something that existed inside the same space, but also in areas perpendicular to space, in dimensions that physics said could not exist, however did exist, shifting via the gateway that the Parthenon had become. Human beings felt it without delay. Vacationers on the Acropolis noticed, first, the sense of being watched through something that existed just outdoor their peripheral imaginative and prescient, intelligence that observed them from instructions that had no names. Then it spread across Athens, the presence extending outward from its gateway, exploring bodily fact the way human beings might discover a newly discovered cave, curious however alien, incomprehensible however no longer adverse. Sarah stood at the Phoenix Hill, searching up at the finished Parthenon, watching humans' reactions to the presence they couldn't see but could experience. Some had been fearful, fleeing the metropolis. A few have been entranced, shifting towards the Acropolis as though drawn magnetically. A few certainly stood burdened, seeking to recognize what had changed, why the world felt unique. "What have we finished?" Alexis asked beside her. He'd stayed despite the whole thing, needing to witness the outcome of the system he'd observed. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "We've got let something via, something that has been looking to attain physical reality for who knows how long. Perhaps because the Parthenon become first constructed. Maybe the historic Greeks sensed it, constructed their temple as subconscious reaction to the presence of these entities, created perfect architecture because they were receiving guidance from beings that existed in dimensions defined by perfection. And now we proportion truth with them. Now we study what it manner to coexist with intelligence that exists in areas we cannot perceive. Now the whole thing adjustments, whether we are equipped or now not." The Parthenon stood best towards the Athens sky, not a damaged but fully restored, a living gateway between dimensions. The entities that had restored it moved via physical space, invisible however present, exploring, mastering, converting matters in diffused approaches that would compound through the years into transformation beyond human prediction. The age of ruins had ended. The age of perfect structure, restored by means of forces from beyond, inhabited through intelligence from dimensions perpendicular to fact, had begun. And humanity could have to learn to live in an international, wherein the monuments weren't just human achievements, but bridges to areas in which things vastly stranger than people had constantly been watching for suitable doors to in the end open.